Time is not neutral, it does not simply pass, it works on us quietly, like a sculptor shaping stone. When a man has been without a relationship for a long period, time begins to leave its mark. It is not just the absence of companionship, it is the slow reorganization of his habits, his instincts, and even his emotional vocabulary. Solitude trains him to move to the rhythm of his own life, unchallenged, uninterrupted. At first, this can feel like freedom, even strength, because he answers to no one but himself. Yet with each year that passes, that freedom hardens into structure, and the structure becomes more resistant to intrusion. The man may not notice it happening. He tells himself he is simply independent, but in truth he is being reshaped by repetition, by silence, by the absence of relational friction. Human intimacy is, in many ways, a negotiation with difference. It requires compromise, patience, and the willingness to soften. But time outside of relationship slowly strips away that softness. It creates sharper edges, makes routines feel sacred, and reduces tolerance for disruption. This sculpting power of time is neither good nor bad in itself. It can produce a man who is deeply self-reliant, capable of standing strong in the world. But it can also produce a man who struggles to bend, who finds it nearly impossible to welcome another person into his life without feeling invaded. The longer a man stands alone, the more deeply time carves his shape, and the critical question becomes, when love finally knocks, will he be able to yield, or will he be too rigid to open the door? The answer lies not in waiting for the right partner, but in preparing himself to still be capable of receiving her. When a man has been without a relationship for a long time, something subtle but significant begins to happen. His standards shift. At first, the absence feels temporary. He tells himself he is simply waiting for the right person, someone who truly fits. But as time stretches on, the idea of what fits becomes more idealized, more polished in his imagination. He starts to believe that after such a long wait, the partner who finally arrives must justify every year of solitude. This expectation can silently transform into perfectionism, where no real human being could possibly meet the standard he has constructed. On the other end of the spectrum, some men experience a quiet detachment from the very idea of compromise. They become so used to their independence, to their private universe running exactly as they prefer, that the thought of adjusting to another person's needs feels almost unreasonable. What others see as simple negotiation, sharing space, making sacrifices, tolerating imperfections, now feels like too great a disruption. His world becomes calibrated to himself alone, and anyone else is measured not by who they are, but by how well they fit into his pre-existing order. This shift in standards and expectations is not just a personal issue, it's a deeply human one. Relationships thrive not on perfection, but on the acceptance of imperfection. They are not about finding someone who flawlessly matches our vision, but about meeting another flawed human being and learning how to grow alongside them. If a man waits too long, he risks making the perfect the enemy of the possible. And in doing so, he may discover too late that what he truly needed was not the ideal partner, but the courage to embrace the real one when she appeared. Over time, the absence of intimacy produces a very particular psychological effect. A man becomes self-contained. He builds his life like a sealed ecosystem where everything operates according to his own rhythms, his own priorities, his own preferences. At first, this feels efficient. He knows what he wants to eat, when he wants to sleep, how he wants his space arranged, and he answers to no one in maintaining that order. But slowly, what looks like independence begins to harden into insulation. Relationships demand flexibility. They require an openness to another person's needs, moods, and ways of being. When a man has been without that constant negotiation for years, he loses the habit of adjusting. Even small accommodations, waiting for someone to finish their story, shifting plans for another's comfort, leaving space for emotional expression, can feel unnatural, even burdensome. His inner world becomes so tailored to himself that another's presence feels less like companionship and more like disruption. Yet, what is lost here is not just relational adaptability. It is something far deeper. To be self-contained is to be cut off from the very growth that intimacy provokes. We do not discover our full range of patience, empathy, and resilience when life is curated solely around our own comfort. Those capacities only awaken when we are tested by another's difference. The danger, then, is that solitude becomes a cage disguised as freedom. A man may tell himself he is self-sufficient, but in truth he is unchallenged and therefore unfinished. True strength is not the ability to exist alone without disturbance, but the ability to share one's life without collapsing under the weight of compromise. The question he must ask himself is simple: am I free or merely contained? Beyond the inner world of solitude, there is another force at play: the gaze of society. A man who has been without a relationship for a long time does not only wrestle with his private reality, he also carries the weight of how others perceive him. Friends may tease, family may question, and culture at large often casts suspicion on prolonged singleness, as if it is proof of some hidden flaw. Over time, this external pressure can take root within him, shaping his sense of identity in ways he may not even recognize. What begins as curiosity from others often turns into self-consciousness. He starts to wonder, what do they see in me? What do they assume about me? Shame becomes a quiet undertone, even if he hides it beneath humor or stoicism. The longer the absence, the louder the unspoken question: why haven't you found someone yet? This can breed defensiveness, or worse, a growing fear of vulnerability. Because if entering a relationship means exposing himself to judgment or rejection, the risk feels magnified. Yet here lies the paradox: the very shame that isolates him is often what keeps him from breaking the isolation. Fear of perception becomes fear of exposure, and he remains locked in a cycle where the longer he waits, the harder it feels to step forward. But shame is only powerful when left unexamined. The truth is, no man is defined by society's timeline. His value does not diminish with solitude, nor does it depend on external validation. The real challenge is not proving his worth to others, but reclaiming the courage to be seen as he truly is. Only then can he engage in love without carrying the burden of apology. Desire does not remain static in the absence of intimacy. It adapts, it rewires. When a man has been without a relationship for a long time, the way he experiences longing and attachment begins to shift. At first, desire may burn sharply, the ache for connection felt in its raw intensity, but as months turn into years, that fire often finds new channels. Some men turn inward, retreating into fantasy, distraction, or digital substitutes that provide the illusion of closeness without the risks of vulnerability. Others sublimate that energy into their ambitions, pouring themselves into work, creative pursuits, or personal mastery, where effort feels rewarded and control remains intact. On the surface, this redirection can seem productive, even admirable, but beneath it lies a profound change. The pathways of intimacy are being rerouted. Desire, which was once oriented toward human connection, becomes entangled with solitary coping mechanisms. The longer this continues, the less familiar authentic connection feels. And when intimacy finally appears, it may feel almost foreign, demanding skills of openness, patience, and emotional surrender that have gone unused for years. This is the quiet danger of rewired desire. It convinces a man that he no longer needs what he was designed for, while at the same time deepening the void he quietly carries. He becomes comfortable in substitutes while remaining unpracticed in the very reality he longs for. But desire, however altered, never disappears. It waits, and the challenge for the man is to redirect it back toward what it was always meant to seek: human closeness, imperfect but real. The question is not whether his longing has changed, but whether he will be brave enough to retrain it toward love instead of escape. There comes a moment when prolonged absence from relationships pushes a man to a threshold, a place where he must either transform or remain locked in isolation. Solitude is powerful, but it is also double-edged. On one side, it can cultivate discipline, independence, and a profound clarity about who he is. On the other, it can deepen the grooves of detachment until he struggles to let anyone in. The same years that could shape him into someone of strength and depth can just as easily harden him into someone unreachable. The difference lies in how he engages with his solitude. If he uses it as a mirror, a space to examine himself honestly, to confront his fears, to build resilience without closing off his capacity for tenderness, then time becomes his ally. He emerges not diminished, but sharpened, someone who brings presence and stability into a relationship when it finally comes. But if he uses that solitude as a hiding place, as an excuse to avoid vulnerability or risk, then time becomes his captor. What began as independence becomes isolation, and what once was a choice becomes a prison. This threshold cannot be ignored. Every man who has lived long without intimacy eventually arrives at this juncture, and it is here that he must decide whether to open again or to retreat further inward. One path leads to growth, the other to quiet decay. The truth is simple: solitude can prepare a man for love, or it can render him incapable of receiving it. And the only difference between the two outcomes is whether he has the courage to let his solitude soften him instead of harden him.